Hello, everybody, if you're there. I hope you can hear me. I'm working on getting my act together here. Indeed, he is, Jerry. And I just got off the meeting of the district Senate committee, and I don't know how to turn off the notifications. It's going crazy in the background.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for our Friday Flex session with Dr. Burnside. He's going to share with us Florence an art history walking tour. So if you would, if you do have any questions, place them in the chat and he will answer them as we go along.
Can everybody hear and see me? And
Yes.
Do you see my picture on the camera and the first slide? So we do see that. Yes. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my first foray outside of my comfort zone, which is the biological sciences. I want to share this with you, some experiences I had over in Italy, and particularly maybe something unique. Maybe if you've heard of Florence, you have thought about going to see the David at the Accademia Museum, or perhaps you want to visit the Ponte Vecchio, the famous bridge, or certainly the Uffizi Museum. Those are usually the big three. Maybe somebody wants to be brave and climb up on top of this Duomo here. But I'm going to try and talk to you about some things that might not be as obvious as you visit the city. So let me turn off my camera so you can focus on the PowerPoint here. All right, there's Florence, the main building, the Santa Maria de Fori, which is the main cathedral in Florence. The first time I saw this was on the movie, Dan Brown's movie Inferno, where Professor Langdon wakes up in his hospital building and he looks out the window and he said, "The Duomo, I'd recognize that anywhere." And I didn't recognize it at the time. Now I certainly understood what he said. This church was started in the 1200s, a very ambitious project by the Florentines. When they started it, they did not have the technology to make the dome. And an architect named Brunelleschi came by in the early 1400s and came up with a plan. And so Brunelleschi and his dome, well, that's a topic for another day. But I can tell you, Florence is my favorite place. And as I say that, I realize saying that Florence is your favorite place is just so cliche because everybody who goes there says that. But it's really actually true. And there's my, go to the next slide here. All right, hopefully you can see a map of Italy. And what we see here is Rome right here in central Italy, and up to the north in a region known as Tuscany is the capital of the Tuscan area is Florence. So it's somewhat about halfway between Rome and the mountains, which are up at the top, the northern part of the country. And just want to throw that out there to sort of put a geographic context for what we're talking about today. So I said art history tour. There's going to be some art. I promise we'll get to the art. There's going to be some history. My story here is going to be more about people and events than it is actually the art. I'm going to talk to you about this man here, Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Il Magnifico, Lorenzo the Magnificent, an artist, and two of his patrons. Now, Lorenzo de' Medici was born in 1449 and passed away at the young age of 43 in 1492. But he comes from this long line of banking families. Now, Florence had a sort of representative Republican government, but behind the scenes was the Medici family. And they really ran things, but not so obvious. One of their family sayings was, "Don't look too extravagant, hang out with the people, but they actually also ruled with a fairly iron fist. Lorenzo's father, Piero, known as Piero the Gouty, suffered from and eventually succumbed to complications of gout. Was married to his wife's name was Lucrezia, and together they had Lorenzo, and they had another son and a couple of daughters. And Piero ruled for about 5 years upon his father's death. His father was Cosimo de' Medici, sometimes referred to as Pater Patriae, or the father of the country. He was really the first Medici to take over rule. His father, Giovanni de' Medici, is the one who founded the bank back in the late 1300s, 1397. But it was Cosimo and his approach to banking that led him to rise and become, at one point, probably the richest man in Europe. And just on the upper right there, if you see that, that's the Medici symbol. You find that scattered around all throughout Florence. In the Palazzo Vecchio, the old piazza right outside the Uffizi Museum, there's a series of statues. Here's a statue of Lorenzo and his son Piero. Now, so Piero, we've already had 2 Pieros. I can tell you that as I was trying to sort this stuff out in my own mind and try to learn these names, there's a Piero in every generation. There's a Lorenzo in every generation, maybe 2. Giovanni's, Giulio's. Keeping the names straight was really a challenge. This Piero here grew up to be known as Piero the Unfortunate. He had some unfortunate things happen to him. Now, Lorenzo was a patron of the arts, and he set up a sculpture school in his at his house, at his piazza, his palazzo, sorry, and he had numerous artists come through there. The picture up here in the upper left is by Michelangelo, and Michelangelo spent a significant amount of time in the Medici household, although he claims to be self-taught. That's another story. And that piece right there can be seen right here in Fort Worth at the Kimball Museum. On the bottom there, we see the Annunciation by Leonardo da Vinci. That's in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence and happens to be one of my favorites. Leonardo da Vinci spent some time in the Medici household. How much is up for debate. The top picture is Botticelli's Primavera, which is in the Uffizi Museum. And Botticelli grew up in the Medici household. He was friends and almost brothers with Piero the Unfortunate and his brother and cousin, Giovanni, cousin Giulio. And those people went on to do some very famous things later on in the story. One of the quotes I came across described Sandro Botticelli as being a Medici child. That's pretty interesting thought there. And one of the things that blew me away as I studied and read more about all this stuff is that all these people are in the same place at the same time. You know, I've heard of Leonardo, I had heard of Botticelli, I had heard of Michelangelo, but having them all in the same place really just kind of sort of rocked my world a little bit. The artist in question today, Domenico Ghirlandaio. Ghirlandaio was just a little bit older, but a year older than Lorenzo de' Medici, and passed away a couple of years after. And he happens to be interred at one of the churches I'm going to talk to you about today, the Santa Maria Novella. He wasn't born with the name Ghirlandaio. The Ghirlandaio came about because he apprenticed with his father, who was a goldsmith, and they made these things called garlands, which were, I couldn't find a picture of one, but it's like jewelry that the Florentine women would wear. And so Ghirlandaio refers to garland maker. Now, his father realized that he had a talent for art and sent him off to be apprenticed with a rather famous artist named Verrocchio. And at that time, there was also 3 other very famous artists apprenticing in Verrocchio's studio. Perugino, who's got some artwork in the Sistine Chapel. The aforementioned Botticelli and Leonardo da Vinci were there. One of the things that he's known most for is including portraits of contemporaries in his art. he was very good at fresco, and as he would work on his commissions, he would include portraits of his patrons' family. And here,
Excuse me,
here,
Dr. Burnside,
yes.
I don't think the slides are syncing with your presentation. So if you'll let me know, I can advance them for you and you can keep presenting.
Okay, what slide do you see now?
Domenico, and I'll let you say that last name.
That Ghirlandaio, and that was a challenge for me learning how to pronounce these names.
Okay, is that the slide that you're currently on?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, like I said, he was really good at fresco. He was known for including patrons and their families in his work, in his commissions, and that's a source of information because we get to know a little bit about what Florence looked like and what the contemporary attire was for back in the day. This right here is a self-portrait. He was really interested in making a lot of selfies, and so we'll have a few of them along the way. This is one of my favorites. This is actually in an altarpiece in Florence, in another one of the churches I'll tell you about. So we're going to move to the next slide. Moving. All right, did that one move? This is a.
Would you let me know in the chat if you are seeing slide 9? Okay, let me see.
Are we seeing any slides?
Yes, I'm not sure how you shared it, but the attendees are able to forward through the slides on their own.
Okay. So how about then I'll just say next slide and we can all change, and I'll try and describe what the slide, unless maybe I can do it this way. Are we seeing slides change now?
No. I see down at the bottom, sync to presenter. Let me click on that to see. I'm on slide 9. Is that the one that you're on right now?
Yes.
Okay, I clicked on sync to presenter. So if you all would do that, hopefully that will get you to the same slide as Dr. Burnside.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. So anyway, this slide here is shows a part of, I hope maybe my arrow is moving around too. This is my first time presenting on Teams. And this shows another selfie of Ghirlandaio, described as a rather ruggedly handsome man, which the self-portraits do agree with, but then again, I would probably paint myself more handsome than I am in real life also. So I'm going to switch to the next slide now. This is a painting by Ghirlandaio in the Sistine Chapel. When we hear about the Sistine Chapel, we think of Michelangelo's ceiling, of course. But if you ever get a chance to visit there, there's large frescoes on the walls below the ceiling, of course, which is where you'd find a wall, by Perugino, Botticelli, and this one here, and another one by Ghirlandaio. We see Jesus here is calling the apostles to join him, and St. Peter is represented there in the yellow robe. I'm going to move to the next slide, which is aerial photograph. Yes, I know there's other meetings I'm supposed to be at. This is a World War II era aerial photograph, aerial recon photo. What you can see at the bottom center of the picture is a train station. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, move to the next slide, a zoomed in picture of that same thing. The very bottom is the train station called the Santa Maria Novella Terminal. And during the war, the Germans were using that as a transportation depot, and it had to be dealt with from the Allies' standpoint. So the Allies were going to bomb that train station. They were just going to. This is out of the book. Both these pictures are out of the book Saving Italy, which is a really fantastic account of the Monument Men story and how they tried to save as many of the cultural treasures that are found in Italy during the conflict as possible. So the Allies were going to bomb this train station down here at the bottom. But if we look over here on the right, we see a series of bridges. And the one at the top labeled the number 46, maybe you can see that, is the Ponte Vecchio. And the Monuments Men made outlines of cultural treasures that didn't want bombed. And the main cathedral is up here in the upper left. And so you can see there's not much room for error here. Not at all. In the next slide, I'm going to switch to a church that's right here at number 8, which is literally just a couple hundred yards away from the train station. And so I point this out to demonstrate that we're actually lucky any of this art and cultural treasures survived that conflict. So this next slide, slide 13, is the facade of the Santa Maria Novella. Now, Florence is my favorite place. The Santa Maria Novella is my favorite place in Florence. They're followers of Saint Dominic and have the church, so they're a Dominican order. They took over the building in the 1200s. The facade comes to us from the 1500s, and it's a rather large complex. It's the second biggest church besides the main cathedral in Florence, and their patron saint is Saint John the Baptist, and that'll come into play here in a little bit. We go move to the next slide, 14. We see a picture of the inside of the Santa Maria Novella Church. It's tremendously huge. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in here, but I can't do it justice. You could go here for a half a day. The amount of material and amount of art that's in here is just incredible. You see way off in the distance, you see a cross. And that cross is from the 1200s by a guy named Giotto. I'll show you a close-up of that here in a moment. The large church had a large chapel. One of the traditions of the Catholic faith is that a family could buy a chapel or pay for the rights to decorate a chapel, and then it would be dedicated in their name. They can entomb their family members there. Well, this is the largest chapel, Cappella Maggiore, available to anybody in Florence. So when it came up for decoration, everybody wanted their family to be the one that had the rights to it. It would bring fame and fortune and prestige to whichever family could take over. Well, it was had originally been the rights had been belonged to a family named the Ritchie family since the 1300s, and the Ritchie family they were a banking family, and they underwent some hard times. They filed bankrupt. Well, they didn't file bankruptcy, but they went bankrupt and they never really recovered from it. So by the time the 1480s came around, for time reference, that's what I'm talking about, the 1480s, it was in serious disrepair. The walls were flaking off. It was just had not been upkept. And so the Dominicans threw out the idea that, hey, maybe a family with some money can take this over. And so there started the bidding war. So the Ritchies were going to, and when I was there, I was telling this story, and somebody said, the Ritchies, they weren't so rich, were they? And unfortunately, no, they were not. So this is slide 16. And so the two prominent Florentines were in competition for who could have the rights to this chapel. Francesco Sassetti and Giovanni Tornabuoni. And now they both worked for Lorenzo de' Medici. Francesco started out as a clerk in the Avignon branch in France, and worked his way up to junior partner. And as his income increased, he started investing more and more and more in the bank. And well, that's a pretty good idea. It made him pretty rich. They moved him over to the Geneva branch for a while. And then in 1458, then he came over and became the general manager of the main Florence branch, working for Piero de' Medici. And so in 1458, he would have been a prominent member of the household. He would have been in and out, and Lorenzo would have been 9 years old. So Lorenzo would have known Francesco Sassetti very well. He rose to hold the highest rank in the Medici Bank that was available to somebody who was not a family member. So he's got a pretty good argument why he should be allowed to purchase the rights. Well, Giovanni Tornabuoni, on the other hand, he was the general manager of the Rome branch. Now, the Rome branch is particularly important because that's where the papal accounts come from. He's banker to the Pope, banker to the Curia, which is the College of Cardinals. And so the Medici family sent Tornabuoni there because he was so trusted that he could take care of this very important business matter. His family, the Tornabuoni family, had been in Florence for a very long time. They were very well known. And Tornabuoni was also a patron of the arts. So who's it going to be? They both have plenty of money. They can both afford it. They both work for Lorenzo de' Medici, who is really going to be the one behind the scenes. Sure, the Dominican monks are going to have an input to this decision, but it's not going to happen without the blessing of Lorenzo. And these two guys both work for Lorenzo. So let's switch to the next slide. Maybe. So who will win? Well, their employer is the same. They both, not only do they both work for Lorenzo de' Medici, but they both worked for the family for a long time. They both started out working at the bank under Cosimo de' Medici, and then again Piero de' Medici, and then when Lorenzo took over, Lorenzo de' Medici. So he would have known them as long as they were alive. So this doesn't really differentiate our problem very much, does it? Next comes the family patron saint. Francesco Sassetti's family, their patron saint is St. Francis. Of course, Francesco is named after St. Francis. The Dominicans of the Santa Maria Novella, their patron saint was St. John the Baptist. So typically the family would decorate their chapel with their family's patron saint. And this just doesn't really line up that great with the Dominicans. What about Giovanni? His family's patron saint is St. John the Baptist. So that dovetails a little bit better with the mission of the Dominicans who run the Santa Maria Novella. But maybe that's not enough. Who knows what's going on in the mind of Lorenzo the Magnificent? So let's take it to the next one. Any relation? I told you that Sassetti had the highest rank that was possible for a non-family member, but he's not family. And family is everything. Remember I showed you Lorenzo and his parents, Piero and Lucrezia. Well, it turns out that Lucrezia's maiden name was Lucrezia Tornabuoni, and Giovanni Tornabuoni is her brother, which means that Giovanni Tornabuoni is Lorenzo's uncle. So I think you can figure out how that went, and Tornabuoni was given the rights to decorate the chapel, and Sassetti came in second place. But as I'll show you, it's not so bad. So this is just a stock photo of the chapel. You can see it's absolutely huge. It goes up 3 stories. What you see is on the far wall is a series of amazing stained glass windows that were also designed by Ghirlandaio and installed in 1492. And actually, those windows were my wife Penny's favorite part of the anything we saw on this particular day. Now, on the left-hand side is a series of 12 frescoes detailing the life of Mary the Virgin. On the right side is a series of frescoes outlining lives and events in the life of St. John the Baptist. And so now there's a dozen or more of them, and we can't possibly spend enough time discussing each and every cycle on our panel of these cycles. It's just awe-inspiring. It's really a lot bigger than it looks. These pictures here, this picture here, I couldn't get just one picture, so I kind of had to copy and paste to get them to be in the same frame. And they're, like I said, 3 stories tall, just absolutely amazing. And those windows are facing the train station. That train station is about 100 yards or so on the other side of those windows. And so how the train station was bombed without breaking those windows, there must be an amazing story behind that. Here in this picture here is known. This is on the bottom of the left wall, and it's called the expulsion of Joaquin. Joaquin was Mary's father, and he went to the temple to sacrifice a lamb. You can see another young man back here. This whole thing is set in a Greek motif with the octagonal altar where they're going to sacrifice the lambs, but he got expelled for suspected sterility. Well, he obviously had a child, so I don't get that part. We look in there. It's always an interesting thing to look at. Who's looking out at us from these pictures? This one over here. One looking at us here is this guy here is a famous poet and humanist known as Poliziano. And behind him is, oops, what happened? And next to him is Lorenzo Tornabuoni, Giovanni's son. Now, Poliziano is going to show up here in a couple of these paintings. And we look over here, and we see there's Ghirlandaio, another self-portrait, looking out at us. It's pretty well accepted that Ghirlandaio did most of the lower frescoes himself, and the farther up you go in the wall, the more the influence of his students. Maybe they might have done all the frescoes at the top. So it's pretty well accepted that he did this his own self. That this is actually Ghirlandaio's handiwork. This next one is the Nativity of Mary. And what we see in the upper left-hand corner there is Joachim and her mother Anne hugging, representing a famous event that took place when Joachim came from a journey and met his wife at the Golden Gate of Jerusalem. And we see on the far right the new mother, Saint Anne, in her bed, and then we see the handmaiden with the baby. And the woman standing in front of the line, this one right here in the middle of the picture, coming to greet the Virgin Mary, represents Ludovica Tornabuoni, which would be Giovanni's daughter. And so what we see then is also more examples of contemporary Florentines in this fresco that's set in biblical times. And maybe I could get Jerry to interpret this saying up here. What I've been able to find out, it's written in Latin. It says, "Joy, your birth, O Virgin Mother, announces joy to the whole universe." It's kind of nice to have that in the background. Now, as you're looking at this, remember this is on the left-hand wall of the chapel. You're standing here looking at this. Those windows are off to your right. And if you take a look at the lighting, you can see it's the painting is actually as if the characters are being lit from the above to the right. We contrast that with, we go over to the other wall. Maybe. And we see this is the birth of St. John the Baptist. Once again, one of the first things that jumps out now as we turn around, those windows are on our left. And so if you look at the lighting, it looks as if they're being lit from the above left. So it's an actually great use of the lighting. The Baptist mother, Elizabeth, is there on the bed. And of the people coming to visit, represented this one here, the oldest woman in this of those three visiting, the newly born Baptist, is a representation of Lucrezia Tornabuoni, who at the time Ghirlandaio painted this had just passed away. Here's a picture. It's kind of a crummy picture, but I wanted to include it because I took it myself. It's called The Apparition of the Angel to Zacharias. Here's a better picture of it. So in here, what we see is Zacharias, who is St. John's father, being visited by the angel Gabriel, telling him, hey, guess what? You're going to have a son. Then what we look here, and we see down here, this guy right there, there's Poliziano again. And on the right side, we saw this a little bit earlier, Ghirlandaio with another self-portrait. So what we would have here is the biblical characters where we'd be wearing the type of clothes that would be consistent with biblical times, whereas the people in the audience are all dressed as contemporary Florentines. Now, these three down here, I wasn't able to find out any information about them, but they sure look like they're representing to me Lorenzo's sons.
Dr. Burnside,
Yes.
we can't see where you're pointing, so if you'll tell us where you're talking about, then we can direct our attention to those locations.
Okay. That would be on the lower left, those three young men on the lower left. All right, I'll put my pointer away since, well, maybe I can. Cursor. Is that working?
Yes, that's working.
Oh, technology. All right, yes, well, that's good to know. These three down here. And Ghirlandaio would be up here. And this one over here, Poliziano. Now, why Poliziano? Why is he showing up in all these paintings? Well, the quick answer to that question is he was also a member of Lorenzo de' Medici's household, and he was hired to be a mentor and a tutor to Lorenzo's sons and his orphaned nephew, Giulio. Let's see, in this particular slide, this is called the Visitation, where Mary and Elizabeth meet, and another Tornabuoni relative over here. We can see that, I hope. On the far right, dressed in the light color here, is a representation of Giovanni Tornabuoni's daughter-in-law, who had just recently been married. And if we look back here, I don't know, I didn't show a picture of this, but this is a replica of the tower from the Palazzo Vecchio. With all these details that are in here. One of the things that I read was that this had to be a long contract because all of these paintings, it was contractually laid out what was going to be involved. Here we have the baptism of Christ. And so the St. John, of course, then baptizing the Jesus Christ. And then up here we have, this is pretty typical Renaissance art, where we have the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. We have God, the Father. We have the Holy Spirit represented by the bird. And then, of course, Jesus and St. John down here. There we go. There's the crosses, I promise you. This first one on the left is the cross that was way off in the distance in that first picture by Giotto. And this one in the middle, this crucifixion scene was sculpted by Filippo Brunelleschi, the same guy who is the architect of the Duomo. And on the right is another rather famous crucifixion scene by a fellow named Masaccio. All three of these are also in the Santa Maria Novella church. So there's so much there. If you were going to go there and visit and you're interested in learning about the art that's in there, I suggest that a half a day would be reasonable. And I think it costs about €9 to get in. So let's leave the Santa Maria Novella. In this picture here, the Santa Maria Novella is right here. We can see the train station on the upper left. And we're going to come out of the Santa Maria Novella, and we're going to walk down the street, and we're going to come around this corner, and we're going to go into this church right here, which is the church known as the Ognissanti. It doesn't look like much from the outside, whereas the outside, the facade of the Santa Maria Novella is remarkable. The facade of the Ognissanti Church, you just walk right by. If you were just in town to visit some of the big three like the David or the Uffizi, and you're walking around looking for something to eat, you would probably walk right by the Church of the Ognissanti. But go in and take a look around. I was in Spain with some people, and one of them named Mike, he said, just go into these little churches. You never know what you might find inside. And so inside we went. Now, of course, I knew what we were going to find in there. And if you go inside, you look at it, it looks like just any regular Italian church. It's not big, not fancy. But you find something in here. Now, at one point in the 1480s, over here on this side of the church, Ghirlandaio was making a painting of Saint Jerome in his study. Saint Jerome is famous for translating the Bible into Latin, and so you see that's a motif you see in Italian art a lot, Saint Jerome in his study. But another interesting thing is, if that's not enough, at the same time, across the way, Botticelli was making a painting of St. Francis in his study. So once again, I'd never heard of Ghirlandaio until fairly recently, but of course I've heard of Botticelli, and then here they are in the same place at the same time, talking to each other. How do you deal with this? Or I don't know, what solution do you have to that problem? What do you think is going to happen when the town votes tomorrow? What's for lunch? Just like a bunch of us would collaborate in the hallway. There's Ghirlandaio and Botticelli. Now, when we were there, Ghirlandaio's piece of work was off being loaned somewhere, and so we didn't get to see it. But this is Botticelli's version of Saint Francis and his study. In the Ognissanti Church, Sandro Botticelli is an intern, and here's a picture of his tomb. In the next chapel over, also entombed in the Ognissanti Church, is Amerigo Vespucci. Now, Amerigo Vespucci, that name might ring a bell. Amerigo Vespucci was an explorer, and the Americas are named for him, or in his honor. They have a whole chapel there, and there's all manner of story that goes along with it. But there you are. There's Sandro Botticelli interned. There's Amerigo Vespucci, and it's just literally walking on hallowed ground. And you can see that this looks like pretty obvious that it's a Last Supper. You can see it's a fairly large fresco. This is also in the rectory around the corner from the main church. Ghirlandaio's Last Supper. One of the unique aspects of his Last Supper is that it shows pictures of the outside. In other renditions of the Last Supper, it took place entirely inside. So Ghirlandaio's was one of the first ones to have an outside view. And the apostles are all described as maybe like interrogating Judas, who in this version sits apart from the apostles. Now, of course, when you think of the Last Supper painting, a lot of people are going to think about Leonardo's Last Supper. Well, Leonardo would most certainly had seen this. This fresco was finished about 1480, and it was the late 1490s when Leonardo did his in Milan. And so Leonardo, being a Florentine, would most certainly have been familiar with this and took the opportunity to make the scene, Leonardo's Last Supper, is a much more vibrant scene, especially with all the hand gestures. And one day I'll come back and we can talk about Leonardo and his version of the Last Supper. So now we're going to leave the Ognissanti. This is the Ognissanti Church here. The Santa Maria Novella was off to the left. We're going to come out by the River Arno. We're going to take a left, and we're going to walk down the Ponte Carreria to this bridge right here, the Ponte Trinita, and take a left. We're going to go into another church right there. The third church up here is the rather famous Ponte Vecchio, or Old Bridge, the one that's covered and filled with jewelry stores. So let's go down here and think about taking a left. And there's the Ponte Trinita. A bridge is what Ponte means. We're going to go into this piazza here, and we're going to talk about an event that happened in this castle, or palazzo, palace. And the church is right here. You can't see it real well from that angle. But what I wanted to point out is that was the bridge in 1944. As the Nazis were escaping from Florence upon the Allied advance, they blew up all the bridges crossing the Arno. They'd promised that they weren't going to, but they did. And so that this is a temporary bridge that was built during the conflict. You can see the Duomo off in the background here. So here, happier times, they rebuilt the bridge. When they rebuilt that bridge, they actually dredged up some of the material from the river bottom and used it to reconstruct the bridge. So at least it's made of some of the same material. So here's the church. We still can't see a real good look at it, but you can see it doesn't jump out at you. And there's this piazza and this building here. Now there is a story about a young man who fell out of a window, or on some accounts that he was pushed, and fell down into the piazza and died. And all the people around, of course, came rushing over. What's going on? What's going on here? And when St. Francis made an apparition and blew life into and resurrected the boy. So that's a famous St. Francis story that involves the piazza right here. So let's take a. There's the church. Once again, if you had just come out of the Uffizi and you were looking for something to eat, or maybe you were going to go get some gelato, as Rick Steves will tell you, get gelato every time you can when you're in Italy. He's not wrong. The gelato is fabulous. You might just walk right by this church. This is the Church of the Santa Trinita, or Holy Trinity. We go into the church and we take a look to the left, and this is what's called the City Chapel. So yes, Francesco Cecitti came in second. He did not get the rights to the Cappella Maggiore in Santa Trinita, now known as the Tornabuoni Chapel, but he did get this chapel in the Santa Trinita Church. And so what we see is here's a comment. I'm going to close-ups of all this, maybe. We have it's real common to put the patrons inside the pictures of the patrons inside their chapel. Francesco is entombed over here on the right, and his wife entombed on the left. And this is a replica of the altarpiece, which is also this whole thing was also frescoed by Domenico Ghirlandaio. And this is a replica of the altarpiece, which is now in the Accademia Museum, which is round the corner. You go visit the David, you see the David statue, and you go around the corner and you can see this altarpiece. And then here's a fresco depicting the resurrection of the boy, and the fresco on top, I'll describe that from a better picture. So here's Francesco and his wife praying, of course, to the altar. Now this is the picture I took of the fresco resurrection of the boy. You can see St. Francis up there, and let's go with a better picture. So this I'm having a hard time describing how interesting and cool it was to know this story, to have been just standing out here in the piazza. Here's the palazzo that the child fell out of. Here's the Santa Trinita Church. Here's St. Francis blowing life into the boy. And it was just kind of a really cool experience to know about this story. And I had been standing out out there with Penny, telling her about this story when we walked in and immediately saw this fresco. It was pretty amazing. So what we have over here is this is stop that. This is Cecitti's daughters and daughters-in-laws on the left, and on the right is his sons and sons-in-law. We see the boy has been resurrected, St. Francis blowing life into him, and I just can't help but think that looks like Ghirlandaio to me over here, but I couldn't find anything that suggested that. At the top of that cycle is this is known as the confirmation of Franciscan rule. In the background back here, we see St. Francis receiving his holy orders from Pope Innocent III, making Francis a legitimate denomination within the Catholic Church. Now, this actual event of Francis taking the orders from Innocent III would have taken place in the Pope's church in Rome, the St. John of the Lateran. However, this painting is set in Florence. So instead of the St. John of Lateran in Rome, this is the Piazza Vecchio, right outside the main palace. So that in itself, I think, is kind of interesting. What we see over here is Francesco Sassetti's sons. And then on the right side, we see this fellow here would have been a brother-in-law of Francesco Sassetti, and he was Gonfaloniere, which is like the mayor of the town. Next to him is a portrait of Lorenzo the Magnificent, which would have been made while he was still alive. So it's assumed that this is a pretty accurate rendition of what Lorenzo might have actually looked like. Standing next to Lorenzo is Francesco and his son Federico. Now, to have a painting of you and your son standing next to Lorenzo in Florence while Lorenzo was alive was a really, really prestigious thing. So this also solidifies and cements how close the Sassetti family is with the Medici family. Coming up the stairs here is our favorite tutor, Poliziano, followed by Lorenzo's sons and orphaned nephew, Piero, Giuliano, Giovanni, the blonde one I suggested might have been in that other painting. And Giovanni de' Medici went on to become Pope Leo X. And I can't tell which one is in this picture, but his orphan nephew, Giulio, went on later on then to become Pope Clement VII. So it's also an example of contemporary Florentine apparel, which there's not really a lot of record of. And really, from the references I read, Ghirlandaio's frescoes are some of our best representations of what they wore back then in the late 1400s. There are some beautiful windows in the Santa Trinita, but they definitely don't. They're very beautiful, but the windows in the other church are just amazing. Here is the altarpiece, like I said, which is now in the Academia Museum. It's called the Adoration of the Shepherds. This would have been just below the altar in the City Chapel, but I guess it was removed. We have a sarcophagus that's going to act as the manger for the Christ child. And what we have here are the shepherds. And this is the first picture I showed you of first self-portrait of Ghirlandaio. He's kind of pointing to himself with his painting hand, pointing out that, hey, look, here's the Christ child I told you about. And I think I particularly like that one. I'm not sure why that calls to me. Maybe it's the dramatic colors. There's just something about that particular one that I like. So we come out of the church. We go back out to the altar. To the river. We've already seen a bunch of altars. We come back out to the River Arno. There is the Ponte Vecchio. If you walk down the river that way and go underneath the Ponte Vecchio, then you'll come in, take a left. There's the piazza where the Uffizi Museum is, and the Palazzo Vecchio. Here's our entire walking tour. So here is the Santa Maria Novella with the Tornabuoni Chapel. We came out of there. We walked around the corner over to here, where this is the bell tower for the Ognissanti Church. We came out of that magnificent church. We walked down the River Arno bank, and we took a left and went in here. to the Santa Trinita, which is right here. And also, so look, look how dense Florence is. All the art I just told you about and more, a lot more, right in here, maybe not even a quarter mile of walking. You see the tremendous, beautiful Santa Maria Novella. The train station is right behind it. This picture here gives us a good reference for how close the church is to the train station. And as I read the Saving Italy book, it's really amazing that anything survived. Those windows, those magnificent 3-story tall stained glass windows, are on this side of the church. And so bombs going off over here in the train station, and somehow those windows didn't break. And beautiful, serene view of Florence. Here's the Ponte Trinita. We have the Ponte Vecchio behind it. You see all kinds of people walking around there. Oh. Whoops. A lot different than it was in 1944. Here's a bonus view. I took this picture out of one of the windows of the Uffizi, and we have the Ponte Vecchio, and that's the Ponte Trinita in the background. Now it's time for some acknowledgments. I'm a biology professor, and didn't really have much of an appreciation for art. And I went on faculty study abroad trip to Spain, and with this wonderful man here, Jerry Coates, who set up the whole experience. And we went to a town called Toledo, and we went to a church in Toledo, and our guide had he had a PhD in art history, and his dissertation was the ornamentation of the choir area of the cathedral in Toledo, which is just amazing. And he gave us a good presentation, and just something in my mind clicked at that particular point. And right when I took this picture of Jerry, we were in this big mercado where we could find all kinds of different foods, and we were all sharing different things we found. And a nice lady, another American, came up to us and asked us, she said, "I'm going to be here for another day waiting on a friend. What should I do?" And I launched into a tirade about how she needed to go to Toledo, and she had to see this choir area, and it just defies description. In gold, it started out with Adam and Eve and went all the way around, probably about 3-foot tall panels, the history of the ancestry of Jesus Christ. And it ended right next to the final panel, was right next to the Adam and Eve panel, was the manger scene. So it was really amazing. And I got to make a big shout out to Jerry, who really helped get me an international experience and learn and appreciate and love things that I had no idea about until we went there. And then there's this guy, Michael Downs, or as I call this picture, Indiana Mike. He had just gotten that hat, and that's in Cordoba, Spain. And it's another really awesome place. But Mike and I have had many discussions, and we don't agree on everything. But we do agree that Caravaggio is probably amongst the best painters in the entire world. And it's Mike that suggested to never go past a little church, to go on inside, and you never see never know what kind of treasure that you'll find in there. So thank you so much, Mike, for your insight. And I was talking to Mike about Michelangelo's renditions of the beheading of Holofernes. The Holofernes, make a real quick story short, was a general who was about to besiege Jerusalem, and Michelangelo's got a portrait of that in one of the corners or pentatives in the Sistine Chapel. And Mike said, "You want to see something graphic? Look at Caravaggio's version of the beheading of Holofernes." And so this is in the National Gallery in Rome. I made it a point to hunt it down and go see the original. And this is Judith cutting off the general's head. She's a famous hero in a Jewish and Catholic lore. And it gets described as Judith is kind of not wanting to get dirty, but her handmaiden is leaning in with the bag to put the head in, saying, "Yeah, get him, get him." Anyway, thank you, Mike. I'd never have thought to go see that without you. And also in the Uffizi is a very unique version of the beheading of Holofernes. Like I said, it's a motif that you see. When you're there long enough, you come up to something, you say, "Okay, well, that's an Annunciation, or that's a beheading." And this is in the Uffizi by Botticelli. Almost all the time, it's either the act of cutting off the head, or the head is in this one panel. In Botticelli's, it's his generals finding the head, and in the meantime, Judith and her handmaiden are running off and making their escape. And I have to acknowledge my beautiful wife, Penny. Look at that smile. Isn't she precious? We had just come out of the Vatican here, and this is Leonardo's version of St. Jerome in the Wilderness. But this was her bucket list. And after traveling to London with study abroad and Spain with study abroad, and she was patiently waiting, the only thing she ever wanted to do was go to Rome and see Michelangelo's La Pietà, and go to Florence and see Botticelli's works there, which we did. And so a shout out to my wonderful wife, Penny, whose bucket list has become my next bucket list. And I just happen to have this in here, but I'm happy to find out that my oldest daughter has a favorite Caravaggio, The Sacrifice of Isaac, which is in the Uffizi. And anyway, I hope that that brings me to an end. I hope that I've sort of piqued your interest. I hope you want to go to Florence more than you ever wanted to before. And if you have any questions, a lot of that stuff I got out of a book. I could share you my references. I don't have them handy, but anybody have any questions? The comments are interesting. It's been my pleasure to share what's a very new passion for me. We were there 10 days, and we spent 4 days in Rome, 2 days in Florence, and we went to the Cinque Terre on the coast. If we had that to do over again, we'd have stayed in Florence. You're all quite welcome, and really thank you for the compliments.
Dr. Burnside, you did a great job. Thank you for presenting today. And we had minor technical difficulties, but you kept moving right through it. So it went well. For those of you who are still here, I placed a link to a feedback form in the chat. Please go to that link and provide Dr. Burnside some feedback. We appreciate you coming today, and I look forward to seeing you all next Friday when we start our March series. Thanks again.
Thank you for moderating and helping me through this, my very first experience.
You did well.
Thanks.
And I really enjoyed it.
Good.
If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to place them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Well, I guess there's no questions. That's pretty good. I'll hopefully I'm going to post this on YouTube, because there's a lot of people that weren't able to jump onto the presentation at this particular time. So if you want the link, you want to show it to somebody else, send me an email and I'll send you the link back.
Thank you again.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you. And as they say, arrivederci.